Welcome to Machine Minds, where technology and humanity meet. I'm your host, Greg Tarusian, founder of Samson Rose, a recruiting and search business focused on the robotics and AI industries. The Machine Minds show is where we dive deep into the intricate world of robotics and artificial intelligence. As a staffing industry leader with a passion for the frontiers of technology, I'm pleased to be bringing you intimate conversations with the founders, investors, and trailblazers who are at the heart of the AI and robotics revolution. In each episode, we dig into their journeys, the applications of the products they're working on, and the breakthroughs that are shaping our future. Join us as we explore how these machine minds are transforming the way we live, work, and understand our world. Whether you're an entrepreneur, a tech enthusiast, or just curious about this amazing field, you'll learn something new with each episode. Let's delve into the extraordinary. Let's delve into machine minds. Hello and welcome to Machine Minds. I'm your host, Greg Tarusian, founder of Samson Rose, your robotics talent search partner. And on today's episode, I'm joined by Nohtal Partansky, founder and CEO of Sorting Robotics. Thanks for being on the show today, Nohtal.
How's it going, Greg?
All good. Let's jump into it. Well, look, before we jump into the founding story of Sorting Robotics, I'd love to talk about your career, including, we were talking offline, you used to work at JPL, and you founded several companies before this one. So can you share that experience, what your journey's kind of been like before this new founding journey?
Sure. Yeah. So my first company that I ever started was a 3D printing company a little over 10 years ago when I was in grad school. And so that's when I first learned about, building product companies. I did like a startup accelerator. I did like a Kickstarter campaign. I sold some machines to some customers. So that was really fun. And I really enjoyed that process. It was kind of something that I knew I wanted to do. That company didn't really work out. But I then finished grad school and then went to work at JPL. But even before working at JPL, I knew I wanted to start another company. And I kind of chose JPL because it gave me the time. I think out of grad school, I had 3 job offers, one from NASA, one from SpaceX, and one from Moog, another aerospace supplier. And I chose the one that I thought would be the easiest. And so I chose NASA. And then when I was there, I started, after the first couple of years, I kind of got my bearings and was pretty confident in my abilities. And so then I started looking for other things to build. And I started a vegan hamburger company when I was working at JPL. This is 2017. So kind of before Beyond Meat got a lot of press and before there was a big wave of vegan alternative food. And I was really into it. And it was kind of interesting because my boss and my coworkers at JPL were like, "What are you doing?" I have a food shop, or I have a food stand at a local farmer's market for vegan hamburgers. And they're like, "Why?" So
the other end of the spectrum from working at JPL.
Yeah. And I ran that for about a year, and I did it with my now brother-in-law, who's a chef. And that was me kind of exploring just starting another company, because the first company I started was a highly technical company. It was very difficult. And I just was damn, I don't know if that's the type of company I want to start again. I think I just want to start a company. I want to find a need and build a solution around it. And then when I started the hamburger company, I kind of noticed, I don't want to do this. Food businesses are not great margins. They're very difficult. You make no money. Anyone who says they want to start a restaurant, I'm you shouldn't. There's not a...
You hear that time and time again, don't you?
Yeah, and you don't really get it until you start it, and then you're just oh dang, this sucks.
Yeah.
And so then I shut that company down at the end of 2017, and a week later I started this company. And I did it with one of my friends from grad school and one of my friends who also played Magic with me. the grad school friend was working at JPL at the time, and yeah, and then like we kind of started the journey for Sorting Robotics. But yeah, I'd always been like kind of into starting my own thing, at least for the previous years, and I kind of worked its way into here as like I kind of found my path in terms of like what type of companies I want to build, what type of time or what type of things I want to spend my time on. Because I was also trading options a lot when I was at JPL. I was thinking of like starting a hedge fund or something, but that
Wow.
is not very rewarding. Like it's
Yeah.
yeah. So that's kind of how the previous entrepreneurial type stuff folds into Sorting Robotics.
Well, I'm curious, what was it that drew you to entrepreneurship instead of work? Because obviously having offers at like a SpaceX, which so many people idolize and would want to work at a company like that, or JPL and stuff like that, reputable companies, global names, brands, household names, in a lot of instances. What was it that appealed to you about the entrepreneur journey? Is it like, your family had been in it and that's what you known growing in? Was it just ingrained with you from being a kid, or you just don't want to have a boss? What is it?
Uh, yeah, I've thought about this a lot, or I used to think about it a lot. But I would say that I didn't come from a business background. My mom was a psychiatrist, and my dad was like a teacher, healthcare administrator. No one in my family has started companies, either extended or otherwise. My grandfather, the most entrepreneurial, is probably him, but he uh, just worked at Dow Chemical, but he was like a big scientist. Like a lot of the early patents on epoxies and adhesives are his, and but obviously they're owned by Dow Chemical. But like if you Google like the first 2 or 3 patents on epoxies, it's a guy named Alexander Partansky, who's my grandfather. And so like that's probably the most like entrepreneur my family gets. Um, so I wouldn't say it came from my family. It would be nice. I do know a lot of people who like their families like start companies and like they just man they look at the world completely differently and they
Yeah.
just start their professional career completely differently. It's like night and day probably doesn't do it justice. It's probably more like earth and moon, in terms of like how
Right.
they approach things. It's like so different, and I think not having that is like definitely a disadvantage. But I think it was more like I came to the conclusion at some point in like undergrad that I just like didn't think that people were that much more capable than I was, um, and actually there's one quote that like kind of sticks in my head, and it stuck in my head at around a very similar time when I was like kind of deciding what I wanted to do, um, and it was around the same time that I did this co-op. So when I was an undergrad, I took like 4.5 years to graduate. Because I did like a double major and a minor and a bunch of stuff, but then I also took 6 months off to go to a co-op, which was like a rocket company in the Mojave Desert, and it was a small company. It was like I think it was like 40 people, and when I was there, the CEO was like this software guy, and he had learned rocketry through like working with a bunch of people, and everyone there had kind of learned it similar because like they don't really teach you formal rocketry in undergrad. I mean, they teach you how to do rockets, but like learning about rockets and building rockets is like very different.
Yeah.
Um, and so when I was there, I kind of came to the conclusion. I was like, man, these people like some of them are not that smart, and like the CEO and the kind of leadership was like really capable, but
Yeah.
they didn't come off as like unsurprisingly more capable than I was, and I kind of left that experience thinking like, yeah, I could probably start a company. Like this doesn't seem impossible because I guess when I was in high school, it didn't really seem like I didn't really understand how the world was structured. And when I was in college, I kind of got a little bit more understanding. When I went to this thing, I was just like, man, I can see how these guys are doing these things. They're like kind of raising money and like, like this seems very doable. And And so I kind of came across that, and then after that co-op, I used all the money I made from that co-op, which wasn't a lot. It was like a couple grand, and I then bought a 3D printer kit, and I wanted to build something that would improve my skill set. As just like an engineer, and I bought this 3D printer kit. And as I was building the 3D printer kit, this was around the time when 3D printers were being listed on Kickstarter. Basically, like every month there was like a new 3D printer, because this is like circa 2023, 2022. And so 3D printers were like very new back then. Like you couldn't buy a 3D printer like you can today. It was like you had to buy a kit and then like buy a bunch of other stuff to to get it to work. And so as I was making this kit, I just thought to myself, man, this sucks. This is so hard. And I was saying, is this how like all the kits are? Because this is a pain in the ass. And she's like, man, I could definitely make a better one of this. This is not thoughtfully done at all. And then as I was like using the 3D printer, it was very eye-opening, where it was kind of the first time in my life where I could think about something and I had the skills to kind of like CAD model it and design it. And then I could 3D print it on this printer. And like within a day, I could have an idea, I could have this thing, and I could show it to people. And it was liberating. Like it was wild. Like it felt, I remember telling one of my friends, I was like, I feel like a god. Like I'm just like creating things out of thin air. Like this is nuts. And along that same time, I watched a YouTube video and it was like a clip of an interview from Steve Jobs. And it's a pretty famous clip, but in it, he like rants about something, but in it, there's like a line where he says like, there comes a time when you notice that everything in this world was made with people or by people not much more or less capable than you or I. And the world is just comprised of many different things of like ideas that somebody had and somebody was able to build, and they weren't like a magician. It wasn't like the world isn't this like fixed structure. You can poke it and it can have a response and it can spit something out at you. And it's malleable. It's not fixed in any way. And it was like that quote, along with like having that experience at my co-op, and then like being able to just like magically invent stuff out of thin air, right? Like when we like the 3D printing effect is like very real, right? When you just like kind of see nothing, and then like 5 hours later or a day later, there's like a thing. It's jarring almost. And so I think like after that, I became pretty dead set. I was like, I think I'm gonna start something my own. And then I was like, well, the 3D printer seems like a cool idea, and it seems very well within my reach. And I think I could definitely do something different here. And that's kind of what set me off. And then after that, like I became pretty dead set on it. Even though that company didn't work, I still was able to like build and ship and talk to customers and talk to investors and stuff. It became very doable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. I think it's definitely a perspective and personality thing. You touched on, people who have entrepreneurship in their family, they see things very differently, and kind of like the barrier to entry is removed, the perspective is different, and they can jump straight into it and almost encouraged. But having it like you organically, it sounds like, looking at a problem and thinking I can do this better, realizing that you're as capable, if not more, than the people that are already doing it, is unique. And I think a lot of people listening to this who are aspiring founders and stuff should listen back to that part, because it's very true. You don't want to be the roadblock to your own progress or success, and just try it out. But look, let's switch gears, because I want to focus a lot in the time that we have left on Sorting Robotics and the company you're currently working on, your product, the success you're having. I'm interested to hear about the founding story of this, what problem you saw, how you got going. And then let's talk more about, what you guys do, the products. I know we mentioned as well, GECO automated Infusion robot that we talked about offline, and Stardust. So floor is yours. Tell us about Sorting Robotics?
Yeah, so I guess I'll maybe go a little bit more deeply on the founding story. Normally I just kind of glaze over, but the founding story is kind of cool. So me and my friend were working at JPL. He had just started there in December of 2017, and I was just kind of winding down my plant burger business. It was called the Plant Burger. We still have an Instagram, and and I was telling him that, I'm gonna stop this company, but I think I'm gonna start something else, an idea that I've had for a few years, and that idea was a robot that sorted Magic of the Gathering cards, and he was like, "What?" Because he knew that I played Magic the Gathering, just a little bit because I played in college with some of the guys at our grad school, and and I'd actually played Magic professionally when I was in like high school, and I like traveled around the U.S. and I like went to Europe to go to like a pro tour and stuff, and so I was like really into that game, but then I kind of stopped playing it in college because I had to study, and then I kind of started picking it back up. And the week that I shut down my or maybe not the week, it was like a month or so after shutting down my 3D printing company, I kind of was thinking like, oh, what should I do? And I didn't have any ideas. And then a year went by and I finished grad school. And then when I came back home, I went to go visit one of my old co-founders from the 3D printing company. He was a friend that I had from college. And I remember thinking, like, as I walked to him, I'm like, damn, what am I going to be able to start something else? And I remember the like moment when I was thinking about it. I was like, I had to park like really far away from his apartment for some reason, and I was walking, and I was like, man, maybe I'll make a machine that sorts Magic the Gathering cards, because I just started getting back into Magic, and I had to sort my cards again. I remember that was like the one thing that I absolutely hated. I was just like, because when you play a lot, you get a lot of cards, and like it becomes very annoying. And I remember thinking, I could probably sort that. I could probably like make something like that. It's basically a 3D printer, with X, Y, and Z, but like with a computer vision system. And like they already do text-based computer vision. Like this seems like very doable. And but then I thought to myself, I'm like, well, this is a very high-tech company. I'm gonna need friends. And when I started my 3D printer company, I started it by myself for the first 9 months. And I designed the whole printer from scratch. I like did the Kickstarter campaign by myself, and like I almost flunked out of grad school because I got C's on everything for the semester that I was starting it. And so I was like, okay, well, when I do this one, I'm going to start it with people, so it's not like so insane. There's a lot of other reasons, like you want people to be bought in. They need to start from the beginning. They need to be able to feel that pain. And so I just kind of put that idea on ice, and I did the plant burger one because I had my brother-in-law who was a chef. And so then when I shut that one down, I had my friend that came from, he was working at a different company, and then he came to work at NASA. When he came, I was like, oh, I have my friend, my capable friend. And so I asked him if he wanted to join, and he was like, hell yeah, I'm down. Because he actually saw me when I was in grad school and I was starting a 3D printer one. He thought it was like really cool. And so he was super down to do it. And then I had my kind of other person to help. And then I was like, well, we need someone to do the software. And this is where I get really lucky. And actually the company just gets very lucky. And we're like, okay, well, we don't know how to do the software, because he was in the same graduate program I was, right? We both got a master's in aerospace. And I then go, okay, like we need some computer vision for the Magic the Gathering cards. How are we going to do this? And so I just say, okay, well, like, let's go on the Google Play Store and see what is the highest ranking app on the Google Play Store. And it was this app called Delver Lens. And I downloaded it. I started scanning the cards. I'm like, yo, this is great. It's just like scanning these cards willy-nilly. This is going to be perfect. Because I was like 100% confident that I could build the hardware. It was the software that I couldn't really start to think about how that would work. And then my other friend, he was like, yeah, I could probably figure it out. I don't know if we want to get another guy. I'm like, well, let's see what this guy does. And so check the app. So I just cold email the owner of the app, and I say, hey, it's like 2 lines. Hey, I tried your app on the App Store. It works really well. I'm thinking about building a card scanning robot so we can sell to businesses. Do you want to help and like be a part of it? And he just replies like, yeah, this is cool. So like that was like the first week of January. Then the next Saturday, I find out that he lives in Riverside and I lived in LA. I was like, oh, because he was doing his PhD in UC Riverside for computer vision.
Very cool. Okay.
Yeah. And so then, so I say, hey, can I like meet you? Yeah. So the stars are aligning. And so we drive to Riverside. I talk with him. We have lunch for like a couple hours and I tell him what, like, what I want to do. And he's like, yeah, I'm down. And yeah, I was like, yeah, I like, if you want, you can be a co-founder in this company as opposed to like just licensing the tech or something. He's like, yeah, I'm down. Let's do it. And his name was Cassio Santos, and he is my co-founder. And like the next week, he started driving to Pasadena, where I used to live, and we started working on it. And like 2 weeks after that, we put in our formation documents in the LLC, and then we like got to work. And that's where it gets really lucky because I didn't know Cassio at all. Like the only thing we shared is that we played Magic together, and he was a foreign exchange student too. So he was from Brazil. He was here on like a student visa, and we started working on this thing together. And yeah, I mean, it was definitely like super lucky because he was a genius and super capable and not an asshole and like worked with us very well. And yeah, I mean,
all important things.
Yeah, all important things. And like, I mean, 70% of why startups fail, or the cause of 70% of startup failures, is co-founder breakup.
Yeah.
And usually they're always like, oh, you should know your co-founder for X amount of time, da 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 da. And like, yeah, that's probably true. But within 2 years, my friend that I had started the company, like that, who was kind of my friend from grad school, he quit because it was hard. Like, startups are not for everything. Startups not for everyone. Sometimes you want to like go your own way, and like, yeah. So he had a issue year 2, and then by year 3 he was gone. But the guy who I met after a cold email, we've been, ride or die for 7 years. Right? And so like,
I love that.
Yeah. And so, and it's just a mentality thing. I think it's, and being a foreign exchange student, you have a high risk mentality because like you leave everything to go to a new country, and you're already all in.
They send you back.
Yeah, right. And so you're already all in. Like, he's like all in for everything. He's like all in on PhD, all in on this. And so yeah, so that like really, really was like very lucky. And I wasn't initially as appreciative to that serendipity in the beginning, but in like the past few years, especially as things have been picking up, I'm like, damn, that that was like a blind hole in one.
That's so cool. I love that as a story as well, and advice to people that look at what's out there, look what you can already use, and then just take your chance with reaching out to people. Yeah, I'm in the recruiting world, obviously. Yeah. So 9 times out of 10, I'm headhunting people. You occasionally you get a great referral or someone that applies that's good, but 9 times out of 10, it's exactly that. Seen what they've worked on, know the company, know the project, know the lab they're working in, whatever it is. And you have to do some real crafted, genuine, specific outreach for whatever reason it is. And you were lucky. 2-line email, a quick response, and they were semi-local. Great. Sometimes it works that way. The company was called Sorting Robotics from the beginning?
No. Initially, the company was called Sort of Robotics. So we had built a Magic the Gathering sorting machine. That's why it was initially called that. So we called Sort of Robotics because I thought it was funny, because it's like robotics, but we're sorting. But it's like it's sort of like robotics. And then when we got into, and then actually, no, once we started like selling things, we changed the name. Or once we got our first customers, because our customers were like, why is your name called Sort of Robotics? That doesn't make any sense. And we're like, okay, crap, okay. And so we kind of like, we changed it to something very obvious, robotic sorting solutions. We're like, that's what we make. That's what we're doing. And that was what it was for the first year. And like we deployed our first robot we deployed our first 4 robots in customers' facilities within like the first 8 months of like working on it. It was like pretty wild. It was a very quick turnaround. And so then in January of 2019, once we got into Y Combinator, we had to move it from an LLC into a C Corp. And when we changed it from an LLC to a C Corp, we're like, okay, we should change the name because Robotic Sorting Solutions is a very long email and it's very difficult for people to like write it down and it's like a mouthful. And so we said, okay, like we could either change it to something like random, like Blue Sky Robotics or Amherst Robotics. Like there's a lot of these like robotics companies that are like random word robotics. and so we were considering doing that, but like, no, we'll just keep it as sorting robotics, but like make it way simpler. So it's just like, and it's much easier. People usually get sorting robotics pretty quickly. You don't have to you don't have to say it 5 times or spell it. So we just changed it then, and that was a lot what it's been. Even now, it doesn't really make a ton of sense because we don't build a ton of machines that sort anymore. But I don't know.
It is what it is now.
Yeah, it kind of is what it is. Like we've passed that point.
So let's talk about the current company, who you serve, and your products.
Yeah. So our Magic the Gathering card sorter, we sold that off in at the end of 2019 after we had raised money, and we raised money out of Y Combinator specifically to chase the cannabis kind of manufacturing area and service that market. And so we raised a couple $1 million out of Y Combinator's demo day, started focusing on building robots for cannabis manufacturers, spun out the Roca sorter, kind of all at the end of 2019. And the Roca sorter was kind of our like first little exit, and it allowed us to then like kind of wholly focus on building robots for cannabis manufacturers. So come 2020, we like had a bunch of money and we were like chasing after the cannabis kind of manufacturing space. And so spent a couple months or really like over a year of just understanding the cannabis market and kind of know your customer by being your customer. Because 18 months prior to that, I was putting robots on Mars. Right? I didn't know anything about cannabis industry or anything like that. We just got exposed to it because there were a bunch of YC founders that were doing cannabis at the time. And it was like blue sky, like barely anyone was touching it, clearly a large problem. And so when we went in 2020, I took some time off from the company and helped run and found a cannabis manufacturing company, like a co-packing company up in Oakland. And so did that. I took like maybe like 6 months off from the company because we were kind of just doing some R&D for a cannabis manufacturer, but we didn't really like have our own, sort of like competency. And so I left to do that, and I learned a ton, right? So I learned everything about the cannabis manufacturing space and the cannabis economy in California and in the United States as a whole. And it kind of built the product roadmap for the company that we have today. And what I noticed there was we did everything. So my company up in Oakland had at 1.60 people, like 10 of them was co-packing flour into jars and bags for retail. And then we had 30 of them that were hand trimming flour. And then we had another like 15 of them that were making pre-rolls. and then, the management staff after that. And the big problem that I saw back then, this is 2020, 2021, was that infused pre-rolls, which is a normal joint, but then you infuse it with cannabis concentrate to increase the potency and to change the flavor profile and to kind of also change like the behavior of the burn and also the cosmetic appeal. And so at this time, like very few people were doing it, but I could tell that it was becoming quite popular because we had more and more customers ask my co-packing company, hey, can you make this for us? And so we said, yeah, we can try and do it. And so we would follow our customers' SOPs, but it ended up being like very wasteful. It took a ton of time and labor to the point where I just told our customers we weren't going to do it. But then I took that idea and that like pain point that like I was experiencing as like a manufacturer, and then took it back to the robotics company and said, hey, like, let's figure this out and let's solve this problem and see how we can like make infused pre-rolls in a very precise and well-defined way. And that's why we invented Gico, the Gico robot. And with that, we basically kind of launched that system and at the end of 2021 and kind of built that market. So now there's a whole SKU of infused pre-rolls called like injectables, and they're all built, or I would say like maybe 80 to 90% of that market by unit volume is manufactured with my machines. And there's been a few competitors that have popped up over the past year or two, but they usually like do about 60% of the like kind of capability as the Gico robot, and they're about 60% the price. And so they're kind of like a very narrow band. People will like buy the competitors, but once they try to do like anything else, they come and they buy our machine, or they just start out with our machine because they don't want to, mess around with.
Yeah.
Yeah, they
That's
don't want to
great.
like start at the bottom.
Yeah. And what's Stardust?
So that's something that came out of just having a bunch of customers, and that was very, very much customer driven. So Stardust is a device that has like this robotic arm that shuttles joints from several different stations, and in those different stations, it covers them in distillate or glue as an adhesive layer, and then moves it to a coating station where it covers it in either cannabis powder or THCA powder. And then that gives it a kind of like fuzzy look to the outside of it, or like what they call like a frosted look if it's done with THCA.
Saw that on your website, yeah.
Yeah. And
so, yeah.
Yeah, so that's a very popular SKU. It's actually more unpopular than the injectable SKU. And it's funny because that machine, we made Gico to not make that machine, because when I was working at the co-packing company, our customers asked us to coat the joints, and we're like, yeah, this is a huge pain. There's so much waste. Like we're not going to do this. So then we invented Gico as an alternative that was like much more precise. You could use much more material, much like a higher variable of material, and it would increase the like inhaled potency in a much more effective way. And that was like our whole pitch when we were initially selling that machine. We're like, oh yeah, like don't do the keef coated joints, don't do the coated joints on the outside, do this instead. And that think that improved and was a very good argument to a lot of people. And then later we had people that were using our Gico and then coating it again after. And those were the customers that said, hey, can you build us a coating machine? I'm like, well, you're already injecting it. They're like, no, we want to do more. And it's just like, okay. And so, yeah, they wanted joints that were like, 40 or 50% THC.
Wow.
Yeah, so pretty extreme. And so then that's when we developed Stardust. And Stardust is a very complicated system. Like that is by far the most software and hardware mechanically just complex system we've ever built. There's like a lot of things going on. There's a lot of physics behind it that's actually like very difficult. Like I needed to get one of my friends who currently works at like a a different NASA research center, but he's a friend from undergrad. And he's got like a PhD in unsteady flow mechanics, and he helped us develop the kind of like spraying and coating system, because it's very complicated. Like it's just very
Yeah, it
complicated.
sounds like it.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, that is awesome. So you touched on a few things there that it seems like your products are the premium ones in the market. You can do more higher quality, more precise, and a better end product for your company. So there's other competitors out there, but it doesn't sound like they do all of that. Would you say it's a pretty competitive space now as the market's matured a bit?
Not really. I mean, like, there's maybe 2 or 3 other competitors. I would say, like, in terms of purpose-built systems against the GECO, there's 2. And in terms of, like, things that people can jerry-rig, there's maybe another 2. So in terms of total options, there's probably 5. And I would say we probably take 70 to 80% of the sales on any given quarter. And then on the Stardust, there's no other options. Like, we're the only company that has a deployed functional working system. There's people that are working on it or that claim that they're working on it. But I would say the closest competitor is maybe like a year behind getting a functional system. So yeah, it's great. A good thing, right? Like and even then, I think the people that are capable of making a competitor, there's probably only 2 companies that are actually like, they have the competency and in-house ability to design and fabricate and execute on that machine. So I'm sure they'll make a competitor at some point, but it'll be a while.
Yeah, that's awesome. Great place to be. So having a huge impact on the industry's efficiency and product quality in general, it sounds like. That's great. Let's talk about team building, because you touched on, finding your co-founders and how some people, it's not right for them being in a startup, which we talk about a lot on this show. And I always phrase it as like shedding team. You're shedding your team or shedding your staff. Like, it's good to get to a certain point and then you got to replace or grow. But assembling a skilled team is always crucial for a technical startup. And you've touched like physics area here. You've got the hardware, software. There's multiple different areas here. What qualities and skill sets, I guess, do you prioritize when you're hiring for sorting robotics?
So, yeah, I really think this question is very interesting because we did quite a bit of hiring last year. So we started at 12 people in January, and now we're at 23 people now. We'll probably end the quarter at like 25 people. So within a year, we've doubled the company. And I think I learned a bit about hiring over the first few years. So I would say, like, the company's lived in 2 fields, right? Like, the first couple of years, it was just the co-founders and we were trying to figure stuff out. But then, like, from 2020 on, we actually, like, we're doing like a kind of venture-backed thing. Yeah. So I would say this current iteration of the company is about 5 years old. And the first 2 years was COVID. We had 6 people in the company, and it was the same 6 people, and we were just kind of trying to figure things out, right? So we didn't really learn a ton about hiring then. And then we very slowly hired the 2 years after that. It was like 1 person a quarter, maybe, because we never wanted to like overstretch. And then last year it was like a big growth. It was like from hiring 1 person a quarter to hiring like 4 people in a quarter or 5 people in a quarter. And then, there's this like churn of the people that work out after 90 days and those that do and those that don't. And so I learned a lot about hiring last year, and I talked to a lot of people about hiring, and I was also able to see the results of the team, and like kind of like the R&D efforts for Stardust, because we like really like launched Stardust deliveries in June of last year, and it was just all R&D before then. And so there's 2 things that I got out of it. And the first thing was that I am surprised and still really like enamored with the importance and value of company culture. And, I've been doing this for a few years now. And in the beginning, people will say like, oh, it's about the people, da 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 da. Culture is important. I remember reading like the Netflix culture book from Reed Hastings, and he was like, people say like, oh, like why did Netflix beat Blockbuster? And he said it was because of the culture. And I was just like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like what, what does it even mean? And but over the past year, I've kind of so there's this other company I mentioned that's like kind of working on a Stardust machine. And I give you this small story because that company started working on it about 6 months before we started working on it. And they still don't have a production machine yet. They're just running into like a lot of problems because, like I mentioned, it's really hard, right?
Yeah.
So they're 2 years into it, and they have yet to deploy production level machines. And we're about a year and a half into it, and we have now deployed a little over 15 machines, and they're reliable and they're working and they're great. And that company has also raised a lot more money than we have. They're structured very differently. Their business model is very different, but they've raised a ton more money. When we were 12 people, they were 30 people. And now I think there's still 30 people, but like now we're 22 people. But it was very interesting, right? Like you give two groups uneven resources, like either resources in human or financial capital, but you give them the same problem, and then you see what the results are. And if you look at their machine compared to our machine's about the size of a desk, or it's like the size of a refrigerator. Like if you put two fridges together, that's our machine. Their machine is about the size of a bathroom, right?
Wow.
Where it's considerably bigger. Like it's probably 10 times the volume. And it still is having issues, being deployed. I'm sure they'll get it working at some point. But I was like obsessed with this idea. Like why didn't they beat us? Because when I first heard that, like I didn't know that they were starting on it. And then at the end of 2023, I found out that they were going to deploy this machine, and I was about to deploy my machine, or like, kind of announce it to the world. And I heard that they were making it, and I was like, oh no. And I was stressing out so hard. It's like, damn, I want to be the only one in the market so I can gain market share, have the first mover advantage. And I was stressing out so much. But then once they finally announced it, and then they like had all these like kind of deployment issues, my mind shift changed and said, like, why? Like, why is there this like big of a difference? And the only thing I could chalk it up to was culture. Like the company culture, how people communicate, and what is culture. And I kind of concluded that like culture is the framework in which individual contributors of the company make decisions without the supervision of the founders or CEO, and then how they communicate within each other. And the quality of that communication and the quality of that decision making significantly changes the outcome on any product or any interface with the customer or any sales or whatever. And that's all I could math it out to. And it was just like, oh my God, like the most valuable thing in a company is this thing that you can't measure, you can't quantify. And at least at this stage in the company, the only way to like see the results of company culture is to see the shadow of the culture in the products that it develops and deploys and how the company operates. But like, if you look at those two companies on paper and give them the same job, one created what's probably like $100 or $200 million enterprise value market, and one like is still working on it. And so if culture was the reason why this was able to be invented, the culture is the most valuable thing in the company. And so how does that make any sense? It's like really crazy, right?
I mean, I've never heard it be put like that. This is obviously something very close to my heart: hiring, team building, culture, employee and candidate experience, etc. Like all of those things are so hard to quantify, to measure, to articulate in a lot of ways. But when you put this comparison in place, like a real world example,
Yeah.
and like you said, you look at these two companies and the problem on paper, and you probably think it's glaringly obvious who will succeed and who won't. But when you mix in that secret sauce, which is the culture, like you can't compete. Bad culture, bad people, communication. You know, you mentioned about like your co-founder, like he's not an asshole. Like that's so important, right?
Yeah.
If you've
Yeah.
got
Right.
a
Like,
brilliant person that is, even if it's a hire, like a mid-level engineer and they're brilliant, but that is detrimental to your culture, your way of working, your productivity, hitting milestones, camaraderie, people's engagement, all of these things that, again, is so hard to measure or keep an eye on until it's too late.
yeah.
When you have the right mix of people. Yeah, so I'm glad you said all of that. It's tough. And it's
Yeah.
tough when you're early stage and you're small to hire all the best people because your own network is limited. Your visibility of great people is limited. And it might be a great group that you have access to from your alum, from the previous places you've worked at, from college, your employees networks or VCs, but there's still people that you don't see.
Oh,
So
yeah, for sure.
yeah. How have you gone about growing the company? Have you had internal recruiters or?
I've tried all the recruiters. I'm very skeptical on like the recruiter path for us. I think we've tried different types of recruiters. We've tried. I mean, I also just like I don't know. Hiring is just so hard. Like hiring is just so hard, and it's also extremely expensive. Regardless if you like hire a recruiter or if you try to do it in house, or if you have like we had engagements with a bunch of like commission based recruiters, and then those didn't really go anywhere. And then we had engagements with a few hourly recruiters. Those were okay, but then we ended up like spending a ton of money anyway because like some recruiters are better at recruiting some roles, but they're not better at recruiting other roles. And so then you have to have, it's kind of like lawyers, I guess, where you have to have like these own specialty guys.
Yeah.
But that's what we tried to do when we like had a bunch of like robotics or automation recruiters, and like they didn't really go anywhere back when we were trying to find our robotics like cognizant engineers. And then we tried a few kind of like ad hoc like recruiters, and then we just tried to like dedicate a recruiting process in-house. Yeah, I still think the recruiting thing is very difficult. I've come to the conclusion that I feel like the best solution for a recruiter system is going to be like a general intelligence GAI that's like automatically matchmaking like people in some weird way, because like it's too many problems, and like this culture problem is very weird, and it's very difficult to tangibly understand. And I would say like of the people that didn't make it past our kind of like probationary period, maybe 2/3 of them or 3/4 of them had technical issues, and you're just like, oh, okay, like this person can't actually do the job. We need to figure out how to test better for it, right? And that's pretty easy comparatively. But then the culture thing, I would say between 20 and 30% of the people who didn't make it past were like clearly a cultural difference. And the technical one is very easy to dismiss because you're just like, yeah, you're just like you're not doing the job, right? Like, and you feel like you can solve for that moving forward, and whether you do or do not, I think that's kind of up in the air. But the culture one kind of sucks because like that one hurts a lot more than the technical one. The technical one's like, you can't do the job. The other one's like, you can do the job, but like it's just not meshing. You're just like, oh my god, I wish just like they were just slightly different.
I keep my pulse on. I keep a pulse on technology in the recruiting space, obviously, because
Yeah.
if something does solve it, it can kill my career. I'm a big fan of tech, obviously, and
Yeah.
implementing it, but I will always say that it doesn't matter what AI is out there, what tool or anything, you can't replace the human element, and that's where the culture part comes in.
Yeah.
Like, things can refine identification and matching and outreach and whatever it is that you want with candidates on paper, but at the end of the day, as a recruiter, you're identifying a human to work with other humans on a real world project, and then
Yeah.
that's the nuance to it that you can't replace for. But
A magical solution is like an AI that like listens to all companies' conversations, identifies all interactions,
everyone.
and identifies all interactions of every individual, and then when those individuals move companies, matches them to other companies that act in the similar kind of fashion or have the same temperament. Which
plugged into the matrix.
Yeah, basically, you need to be plugged into the. I think that would give you like 100% or maybe like a 95% success ratio, because like I think short of that, it's just so hard. It's just.
It is. Look, Nohtal, I'm conscious of the time. I know I'm late for something else. I'm sure you are. We have so much more to talk about, so we might have to do a part 2 of this, because there's
All right.
other questions, and I can talk about recruiting all day anyway. But look, before you go, thank you so much for your time, insights, all the advice that you've given here, your story, and all of that. Where can our listeners find you and the company and follow along for your progress?
I think to follow the company, the best place would be our Instagram. So it's just Sorting Robotics Inc. INC. So at Sorting Robotics Inc. is our Instagram. And if you want to follow me, the best place would be my LinkedIn. So just linkedin.in or LinkedIn/in/Nohtal, my first name, Nohtal.
We will put that in the show notes
Cool.
for ease. But yeah, thank you again. And we definitely need to get another part of this scheduled.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. Take care. Have a good one.
Cool. See you, Greg.